Thank you, Mr. and Madam Speakers. Thank you, government, for proposing an actually interesting case instead of a Yale case. And thank you, partner and my normal partner, for both being wonderful partners in general. So, with that, I'd like to address what I think is an interesting overview brought up by the Yale team. So they come up here and they say, we assume that a post-apocalyptic world means relatively few people and relatively few resources, relatively small infrastructure. We like this description. We think this description actually benefits our side. You see, without the infrastructure and resources to support these people, and they came up here and they were the ones who gave these caveats, so we don't think they're going to K-shift into MG. So with fewer resources to support new people, with less infrastructure to support new people, we think fundamentally that it's better to use the people that you have to rebuild this infrastructure a bit slowly so that you can support the new people that you get. However, that's actually not the biggest problem that we see in this round with the government philosophy. So our first point is women's rights. You see, as they tried to preempt, this is a liberal democracy. In liberal democracies, we value certain things. For example, we think that hugely invasive procedures that actually violate someone's rights, for example, having to carry to term a 10-pound thing for 9 months in your body is hugely invasive. So we think that this basically violates women's rights. I mean, let's be honest here. What the government is coming up here and proposing is to make all women breeding cattle, as if their only purpose is to be there to have more children. We think this is fundamentally at odds with what a liberal society is, what a liberal society is supposed to do. We think that if they want the focus to be solely on preventing human extinction, then in that case, their best bet actually wouldn't to have a liberal society to do this, because a liberal society would not allow such an invasive procedure to be mandated on every single childbearing woman. Sure. What sort of rights do women have when women don't exist, i.e. society dies out? Thank you. I'll address that in my second main point. So the fact is, in order to accept the government side, at least when it comes to rights framework, in the short term and long term, they are forcing women to become breeding cattle. We think this is a difficult side for them to address, and we think that they have not fundamentally shown this on their side yet. So, our second point is that this entire plan is entirely unnecessary to achieve all of the benefits that they claim they get on their side of the house. You see, first, in traumatic situations, like, say, all of Africa right now, you find that people tend to breed more when they are in poor situations. First, sex tends to be pleasurable, or at least many people believe that. So that leads to more children. Second, in traumatic situations where you don't have very many resources to occupy your time, when you don't have time to do interesting things, what's the most interesting thing left to do? Sex. This is completely unnecessary. Third, in this situation, after all this trauma, the only real way to actually have an interesting life is to be in relationships with people. And when you're in relationships with people and you have nothing else to do, you have more sex. Again, this goes back to, this is completely unnecessary. We're going to have this many children without this quota, without infringing on women's rights, without forcing women to become breeding cattle. So our third point is resources. I brought this up in the overview, but they fundamentally brought this up in their description. We don't think they can K-shift after this point. And if they do, my partner is going to call them out on it repeatedly. So, resources and infrastructure are really important in this case because, as the government says, they are really low. Now, what happens when you try to have a population boom with no resources or infrastructure to support this population boom? People die. That's not good. We think as a liberal democracy, we want to slowly rebuild this infrastructure, rebuild these resources to the point that we can actually support more people. We think that we have a better path to success by slowly rebuilding these resources, by allowing the people that we have now to work on collecting more food, to work on rebuilding schools and stuff, to work on actually having the structure to support people, and then we can have more babies after that. All those wonderful things. So, back on case. So their first point is that they want to have a standard for when it's okay for the government to place restrictions and quotas on people. Now, fundamentally, I think there's one thing that they get confused in this, because every single one of their examples, restrictions on when women can have maximum children, restrictions on how people giving money to the government, all of these are restrictions on things, as in if someone does it too much, the government stops them from doing it more. Not one of them is forcing someone to do something against their will. That is fundamentally fundamentally important in this round because the government cannot simply force someone to take this invasive procedure. The government can say, okay, if you take, we are going to prevent you from having this invasive procedure. Again, if it's going to harm society, we're going to prevent you from simply hoarding your money if that harms society. But they cannot say that we are going to make you get pregnant every single year until you have enough children, or you must have enough children before you die. Would you like to? Okay. So, their next, let's see, what are their points on this? Same as China. As I already said, China has restrictions, they're offering quotas. Quotas are fundamentally more intrusive and less able to fall into their standard. Second, let's see, restrictions like taxes, again. They say that they want future generations of humans to have a larger community of resources. Yes, we want future generations of humans to have a large community of resources. That's why we should rebuild our resources now without simply taking away from the resources with huge population booms and not giving us the infrastructure to support it in the future. We want the long term on our side. We don't want society to have to deal with these huge short-term problems on their side. So, they say that we're going to end up with 5 people in society on our side. We've already shown you why that's not true. People breed more when they're after traumatic situations than they do in normal situations, especially in the United States. They say that relationships are good and that they promote having relationships. We say relationships are good, and one thing that we think fundamentally falls on their side is that you don't get a relationship when you're only having sex with someone in order to fulfill a government quota. You get a relationship when you have a relationship. So we think that fundamentally everything about relationships actually flows to our side because we promote substantial relationships on our side. We do not promote simply forcing women to have sex with men until they've had enough babies. So let's see. They now talk about paternalism, which is actually fairly similar to their first point. So one thing about paternalism is that we have community standards, and in most community standards, we don't accept women simply forcing women to get pregnant against their will, just as we don't generally accept forcing women to have abortions against their will. All of these are very intrusive procedures that we as a government leave to the people to do. If we weren't a liberal democracy, like if this were a post-apocalyptic society where we really need to do this, then chances are it's no longer a liberal society because it doesn't value women's rights anymore to the extent that liberal societies do. So, let's see, there are 3 prongs for paternalism. First, it's justified to protect future rights. We say we actually protect future rights more because we get the same number of people, or almost the same number of people, without infringing on the resources, but more importantly, we don't have to worry about infringing upon women's rights on our side. So we have just as many people. We don't have to worry about them dying off, and we get all their benefits without any of their harms. They say that people are irrational after trauma. However, we would argue that there's actually no reason to believe that the people in government, are going to be any more rational than the people who went through trauma. And so they provide no adequate solution for that. They say that there's an asymmetry of info, but these people have just gone through all this. They have seen the horrors of this post-apocalyptic society. They understand what's going on. They understand that they need to reproduce. So there is no asymmetry of info in this situation. So now they say, their final point is, on our side, people aren't going to produce at all. We've already fundamentally shown you why that's not the case. We think that in order to win this round, government needs to come up here and they need to show you why, fundamentally, women's rights need to be abridged for something that's basically completely unnecessary given that women actually reproduce more when they're in traumatic situations. Thank you, and we are proud to oppose.